for quickly extinguishing the fire that was out here. We've been out here ever since early this morning, shortly after the accident, the crash happened. And I can tell you when we first arrived here, the place was just filled with smoke, heavy, thick smoke just about everywhere. The smell was very intense. And shortly after that period of time, about an hour or so later, the smoke seemed to have dissipated. Also, officials saying no definitive conclusion in terms of the cause of what's happened here. Most of the witnesses that we talked to say that they heard some sort of a loud noise. And then when they went outside to see what was going on, they saw the plane overhead, the plane then seeming to split up and then crash into the neighborhood. The governor is saying that the pilot was able to dump fuel over Jamaica Bay shortly before the crash, and the mayor also saying that because the plane nosedived into the neighborhood, that seemed to minimize the impact. Right now, I want to bring in a guest here. We've got John Condon. He is one of the firefighters who has been out here bravely dealing with this situation here. John, why don't you start out and tell me what was it like being in there? What did you see? What were you able to do once you got there?
The debris is not that widely scattered, but there's a big crater that you can walk into. And you could see sort of which way the explosion, where the fuel must have sprayed houses in different directions from the impact site, because there are certain houses that are untouched right next door to where the plane nosedived in, and certain houses 2 and 3 and 4 away that are singed and scorched on the side, and some that are totally destroyed.
What are some of the special challenges that you're faced with in dealing with something like this when you come out here?
By the time I got here, the fire was under control, but it's the disentanglement now of the people that were inside the plane, and that's going to take some doing.
Have they given you any indication about anyone there who, on the ground, or in terms of fatalities, any other information than what we were just able to provide?
Nothing more than what you were able to provide to me.
How are you holding up? Because I know the firefighters have had to deal with so much already, and you've been out here now for several hours. How are you and your fellow firefighters holding up at this point?
In some ways, just that we're like experts at this bucket brigade now. I mean, the guys all want to be here. Everybody wants to be here to help out and do what they can.
In fact, you saw what happened on TV and just sort of came in on your own, correct?
Yeah, well, they said that the level 1 mobilization again. So my first thing, my protocol is to get to the nearest firehouse if you can't get to your own. So the nearest firehouse to me is right down the block here in Rockaway, and by the time I got here, it was just get to the site as soon as you can and do what you can to help out.
And when you got here, do you remember some of the thoughts that went through your mind as you were out here witnessing?
The first thing I'm thinking is when I knew it was a plane crash, I'm thinking that it's happening all over again, but I don't want to jump to any conclusions. Plane crash is just another thing that the fire department has to deal with, and hopefully the guys are going to be able to handle this all right.
We were listening to the mayor a little earlier, and he commended the firefighters and the police department for getting out here and doing such a quick job.
If you could see just how much was on fire and how quickly they did knock it down, I think in about 45 minutes to an hour, the fire was under control as far as the fire spread. I mean, to be able to bring fire trucks in and put a stop to a fire that was burning that heavily and out of control, I commend those guys, those first 2 guys. They did a great job.
John Condon, firefighter, I want to thank you once again. Thanks for all your efforts. Really appreciate it.
I want to wash that hand.
All right, thank you. All right, once again, Aaron, according to the mayor, we have 6 people who are missing out here in Rockaway, and they've recovered some 161 bodies at this point. The investigation continues. Aaron?
Jason, thank you. Just to underscore what he just said, how quickly they were able to get control of that fire. And you think about how much jet fuel was burning, what the risks were, and those guys, yet again, performed like the heroes that they are. Judy?
Aaron, President Bush found out about this crash just a matter of minutes. We were told a little while ago that he was handed a note by a military aide at the White House just about 10 minutes after the crash took place. John King joins us now from the White House, where the president, John, has been meeting with former South African President Nelson Mandela. This will be the first time today that we've seen the president.
And we were not scheduled to see the president, Judy. This was to be a private meeting, but about a minute from now, I believe, you will see President Bush and former President Mandela. That's the Oval Office door right there, walking out into the Rose Garden. There you see an aide opening the door for the president and the former president. Mr. Bush was not scheduled to make any public appearances, but he has been updated throughout the day on the developments in New York, and he decided he should make a public statement. We are told he will express his condolences for those aboard the plane. and their families, as well as pledge his complete support to the city and the state of New York, the President, and Nelson Mandela. Let's listen in.
I have to be very careful on negotiating steps. It's been my honor to welcome a man whose name symbolizes freedom and courage to the Oval Office. President Mandela is going to say a few words, and I will say some after he finishes. Welcome. Well, firstly, I would like to express my deepest sympathies for the crash that took place today. And it's unfortunate that that should happen at this time, when the United States lost so many people on the 11th of September. But I know that you have got a strong leader, and the people of the United States of America can face disaster, and I'm sure they will overcome this unfortunate incident. I also want to say that one of the reasons for coming here is to be able to express my support for the President for his action in Afghanistan. The United States of America lost 5,000 people, innocent people, and it is quite correct for the President to ensure that the terrorists, both the masterminds as well as those who have executed the action and survived, to be punished heavily. And it would be disastrous if the President gave in to the call that the army must now withdraw before he has actually flushed out the terrorists. That would be a disaster. They will claim that they have defeated the United States of America, and they will continue doing the same thing. So I support him to continue until those terrorists have been tracked down. Mr. President, you don't have to worry about me. We are going to bring them to justice, and I want to thank you for your support. I also want to thank you for your wisdom and your leadership in Burundi. You made a huge difference. The President said, why would I welcome a pensioner to the Oval Office? And the reason why is because he is such a strong man, and it's been my honor to greet you and welcome you. And thank you for your words of condolences. I, too, want to express my heartfelt sympathies for the citizens of New York, those on the airplane, those whose houses were damaged, those who were hurt on the ground, for the recent incident that took place. It is heartbreaking to have picked up the phone and called my friend Rudy Giuliani and Governor George Pataki and once again expressed our condolences, and at the same time assured the people of New York our federal government will respond as quickly as possible. We sent our FEMA teams over, the FBI is over there, and this investigation is being led by the National Transportation Safety Board to make sure that the facts are fully known to the American people. The New York people have suffered mightily. They suffer again, but there's no doubt in my mind that the New Yorkers are resilient and strong and courageous people, and will help their neighbors overcome this recent incident that took place. May God bless the victims and their families. Mr. President, welcome to Washington, and thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It looked like it was not terrorism. Is that why the NTSB has the case?
President Bush helping former South African President Nelson Mandela up the stairs there. We heard President Mandela saying his sympathies are with Americans, with New Yorkers, because of today's accident. He said it is particularly hard coming on the heels of what happened on September the 11th. Then we heard President Bush expressing sympathy too, saying it was heartbreaking for him to have to put in a call to New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and to Governor George Pataki to once again have to express condolences. John King, I know that you are still with us. The president, I guess you would say, has fallen certainly reluctantly but comfortably into the role of someone who is having to help this nation along as it grieves?
The president, since the events of September 11th, yes, a great deal of empathy from the earliest days at the National Cathedral, a memorial service for the country, his visit up to New York. Now, once again, as he noted, a very difficult, heartbreaking phone call, he called it, to the mayor and to the governor. Note the president's caution there, Judy, in the Rose Garden. The administration does not want to add to the anxiety of the country, nor does it want to confuse people any further. In the early hours of such an investigation, information often conflicting, so the president would not take any questions there. He walked away when one reporter shouted the question, "Any evidence of terrorism here, sir?" Mr. Bush not wanting to answer that question. White House officials saying there is no evidence of terrorism, and you did hear the president say the National Transportation Safety Board is the lead agency in the investigation. That is the clearest indication we have that the administration is treating this, at least for now, as an accident. But White House officials saying they do not want to say anything that confuses people or creates any sense of anxiety. That is why the president being quite cautious in his remarks there. We weren't supposed to hear from Mr. Bush at all, but the White House said they thought it was very important that the president wanted to come out and express his condolences and promise the full resources of the federal government. But they don't want to say much about this from the White House until they have much more information.
So, John, they are treating it as an accident, as you say, but of course leaving no door closed. They are leaving all the doors open potentially because they want to make sure that any information that comes in is taken into consideration. All right, John King at the White House and President Bush having just finished a meeting with South Africa's President Nelson Mandela. Aaron?
Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton is talking with reporters out in Queens now. Let's listen.
Once again in the lead of recovering bodies, looking for evidence along with the FBI, the police department, the National Transportation Safety Board are bringing in their experts to determine what happened. As we were walking over here, we saw one of the plane's engines that had fallen into a boat parked at the end of a driveway of a home. And the back of the home had caught on fire, but miraculously the front was totally unscarred. And then another piece of the engine fell into a gasoline station. And again, it missed a fuel truck. It didn't penetrate the ground into the fuel tanks. So although this is a terrible, terrible tragedy, one of the fire chiefs just said that, you know, it could have been a lot worse. And the investigation is looking at, you know, what caused this plane to go out of control so soon after takeoff. There is absolutely no reason to believe at this time it was anything other than an accident.
Mr. Alba, what are you doing now that you're on site? What can you do working with the NTSB and the FBI?
Actually, we're in close coordination with all of those agencies. We just met with Chief Frank Crothers, who's the incident commander here. Things seem to be well under control. There really isn't much that we can do right at this minute. They're going to be working through the night at the site, removing all the bodies that they possibly can, and we'll provide any assistance that any agency needs. I'm here at the direction of President Bush, making sure they have everything that they need. We'll make sure that they are covered from A to Z.
Are we sure at this point that this is just an accident?
I think it's too soon to be sure. I hope that's the situation. That's horrible to say. We hope that it's just an accident, but it's very early in the process in the investigation.
The pilot may have been dumping fuel over the
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Reports the pilot may have been dumping fuel over the bay.
I'm unaware of that.
Would that tell us anything if that were true?
Well, you know, that will be part of the NTSB's investigation. And you'll see a lot of FBI agents and police officers who are, you know, walking up and down the streets. They're gathering evidence, both physical and from witnesses. So that's all being pieced together.
Mrs. Clinton, this is a city where the people have been through so much already. What would you say to them now on this day?
Well, it sure has been a very tough 2 months. But there isn't any city in the world that is better prepared or has, you know, more courage and grit to take whatever comes. You know, I just was running into a lot of the firefighters and police officers that I've seen down at Ground Zero who are here. This happens to be a neighborhood where a lot of firefighters and police officers live. So, you know, we're doing everything we can to deal with this. And, you know, I know that the people of New York can rise to any challenge, and they will.
Mrs. Clinton, we know that there are several passengers on flights are actually foreigners. For these families overseas, where could they seek for assistance?
American Airlines and the City of New York have set up an emergency center at the Ramada Hotel at JFK Airport. Some of you may remember the tragedy of TWA 800. It's the same hotel. There will be people there to provide information and assistance to family members. So I certainly urge everyone to make their way to the Ramada. I know that I visited during the tragedy following TWA 800. That's where you can find information, where you can find help, and it is it's a very good place for people both from this country and elsewhere to seek information.
The junior senator from the state of New York, Hillary Rodham Clinton, along with Joe Albaugh, the FEMA director, in town now, surveying the scene. These pictures are pool camera pictures. It is hard, isn't it, not to see this line of firefighters and keep your memory in the present and not go back to the 11th of September. I was coming into town on the train today and got to Grand Central, and someone walked up to me and said, "This is the season of our tests, isn't it?" And it does seem for the city of New York, this is exactly that. And this is yet another test for New York. Our coverage of the crash of American Airlines Flight 587. Can't answer, but just given the impact zone, which is fairly small and mostly on land, some pieces did fall in the water. It's encouraging. As we were saying, families have gathered at the Ramada Plaza Hotel by JFK. Hillary Lane is out there. The mayor has been out there. The governor's been out there as well. Hillary, what can you report?
Well, Aaron, one of the questions that I asked of New York City Police Chief Bernard Kerik was what sort of condition the flight data recorder appeared to be in, and his answer to me during the briefing about an hour ago was that it did appear to be in good condition. Now that it is back in Washington, as you said, they will see if that's working, and that should shed a lot of light on what happened here today just after 9 o'clock this morning. But Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Governor Pataki, and a number of others briefed us here about an hour ago. They said they had spent about 20 minutes meeting with family members, and then we were told that they spent about 45 minutes meeting with a number of the different agencies involved, including the NTSB, the FAA, and the various police and fire departments. One of the images that was the most stunning that Governor Pataki gave was describing telephone wires just 5 to 10 yards from the main crash site, saying that those wires were still intact. And that, as you said, gives the picture of a plane that came down absolutely vertically rather than gliding across a neighborhood. But Governor Pataki also saying that that was one of the factors that may have led to less of a loss of life on the ground. The other possibility, and Kathleen Koch was just reporting questions about whether the pilot had dumped fuel. Mayor Rudy Giuliani said that he had had a Coast Guard report confirming that, but as you know, in a situation like that, information does come and go. Sometimes early reports are not accurate, but that would have been maybe one of the reasons that they were able to put that fire out so quickly on the ground. Governor Pataki saying because the pilot jumped nearly a full tank of fuel into the Jamaica Bay.
Have been advised that they believe, as part of the investigation, that the pilot did dump fuel over Jamaica Bay before the crash, which is consistent with the pilot having some belief that there was a significant mechanical failure on the plane. But the investigation obviously is ongoing, and there's no conclusion that has been reached or that.
Aaron, as you also mentioned, Mayor Rudy Giuliani wouldn't comment on the state of the families, but we have been told from other people here on the site that it is a heartbreaking scene inside. Many people crying, a lot of emotion, many people also just sitting quietly in corners waiting for any information that they might get. Back to you.
Hillary, thank you very much. Whatever it looks like at the Ramada, we can only imagine. We saw, I don't know, 90 minutes or so ago, some pictures that were shot at the airport in the Dominican. A family and friends gathered there, and they had just heard the news of what had happened. And those pictures, as they always are in these situations, were just dreadfully difficult to watch. Hillary alluded to the fact that a number of people witnessed the crash as it was happening at about 9:17 this morning. What they are able to remember may be helpful to investigators as they try and put this together. We're going to play some of these descriptions for you. Keep in mind that people are reacting under enormous stress in these kinds of situations. Oftentimes their accounts aren't consistent, and it often happens later that another set of facts will prove what they believe they heard was wrong. Okay, but that's what happens is you're under a lot of stress. So with those disclaimers, here are some of the witness accounts of what happened this morning in Queens.
I heard a loud crackling noise, and I looked up, and I saw the left engine coming away from the plane, and I saw a lot of debris coming from behind it. It immediately veered over to the right, and it came nose down. Only a block away from where I was working. When it hit, it immediately exploded.
We were in the kitchen having coffee, and we heard an explosion it sounded like the Concorde with the sonic boom. And my wife said to me, "What's that?" And the next thing we know, we felt the shudder, and the room just exploded. My daughter got blown through the patio doors. My wife got blown into the living room, and I got blown out the patio doors behind my daughter. The black smoke, I just started yelling out for my daughter to see if she was alive. I grabbed her and I ran in, and Eileen was alive in the living room. And we ran out of the house, and with that, the whole back of the house was on fire.
We heard a huge boom, and I ran out onto my porch, and I saw like a mushroom of like black fire, sort of. We just ran up the block because like everybody was like, run, run, run.
It blew up into a huge fireball, and I jumped off the second floor of my house. It was horrible.
I saw a very distinct orange explosion, and I think I saw the whole wing fall, and then the airplane just arced directly down into Rockaway, where I live.
Some of the early reaction from people in the neighborhood as that flight came down this morning. Lots of talk that they heard an explosion. We'll find out if at some point whether in fact that was true or not. But as you can understand, in the stress of the moment, people recounting as best they can what was a horrifying experience this morning. We'll take a break. We'll be joined by Jeff Greenfield, among others, when we come back.
Live pictures, and we're told that the flight data recorder is going to be brought out and driven away in a minute. Maybe we'll get a look at it. In the meantime, let's turn to aviation analyst and aviation journalist as well, Jim Mckenna. Jim, what about the fact that this was such a confined crash, the fact that it went, according to eyewitnesses, spiraled and went nose down?
One of the first things that investigators look at when they get on a crash scene is what is the damage, what's the pattern that the wreckage has laid out on the ground. A shallow descent into the ground will provide a long, stretched out wreckage path. The fact that folks are talking about a very tight wreckage pattern in the Rockaways indicates, as some of the eyewitnesses have said, that this plane appeared to have nosed over and gone straight into the ground. Now, again, that's preliminary information. We don't want to...
Jim, let me just tell our audience what you're looking at. These are pictures from Jamaica Bay. This is clearly a part of the plane. Can you look and... Is this a piece of...
Yes, that would be the horizontal stabilizer, the vertical tail fin on the back of the airplane.
And this is being brought out of Jamaica Bay, I'm told. Now, I just want to, just for those who haven't had a chance to see a map of this area, John F. Kennedy Airport, the runway, the plane took off going west-northwest and then made a big sort of banking turn to the left, and the difficulties began almost immediately. It flew over this large area of water. It's called the Gateway National Recreation Area, where you have a number of channels and, I assume, fairly shallow water, and came down on what is really a strip of land, this Rockaway Park section of Queens. I mean, as I'm looking at a map here, it's maybe 4 blocks wide.
Yes, and it's intriguing that they are recovering some of the wreckage from this airplane from the water. Now, what the investigators will want to answer is whether that wreckage ended up in the water because it hit the ground in the Rockaways and then for some reason was flung or bounced out into the water, which is a possibility because, as you said, it's a very narrow strip of land, or did that piece of wreckage and other pieces of wreckage end out somewhat further in the water, which would indicate that they came off the airplane before it hit the rockaways.
Now we're told that again we're still looking. These are U.S. Coast Guard pictures of Jamaica Bay, which is immediately adjacent to Rockaway Park. And again, Jim Mckenna, what part of the plane is this? Tell us.
That's
again.
the vertical fin that sticks up at the tail of the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting to note, as you can see, that the forward edge ahead of the AA for American Airlines seems to be fairly clean. There's no gouges or dents in that. Investigators would be looking at a part like that for gouges and dents to see if something else had flown off the airplane earlier and struck the tail, which led that piece to rip away, but that piece appears to be fairly clean.
I want to ask you just quickly about the engine service record, but just very quickly, back on as we watch these pictures, back on the point that Governor George Pataki made, where he said some have reported, he said, that the pilot may have dumped fuel into the water. And at the same time, you know, we've been talking to you today, we've been talking to Peter Goals, an aviation expert. He said, and you've just been telling me, this is unlikely.
Highly unlikely that the pilots would have had any time to even think about dumping fuel. The odds are that if the Coast Guard has found evidence of jet fuel on the water in Jamaica Bay, it got there because one of the fuel tanks on the airplane was punctured. Now, I believe that the A300-600, which was the airplane involved, has a fuel tank in the tail of the airplane. If you picture this piece of wreckage that's coming out of the water now as the vertical fin, there are two smaller wings that stick off at relatively right angles at the back of the airplane. Those wings, I believe, contain fuel. Investigators will want to find out where those wings are, and again, if there's fuel on the water, where that fuel may have come from.
What about the engine service record, Jim Mckenna? We've heard that from American Airlines itself that it was a pretty precise record of when the plane was serviced, but more important, when the engine was serviced. One of the engines apparently serviced very recently. The other one clearly due for service. It was 9,800 miles. Hours, hours.
The time on the engines is measured in hours.
Right.
Since overhaul, the number 2 engine, which would have been the engine on the right side of the airplane, had more than 9,000 hours since the last overhaul.
But it was the left engine that people said, that eyewitnesses said they saw falling out.
Well, it's an interesting point, because if you talk to an aviation person, somebody who knows airplanes, looking up at an airplane in the sky, if they say the left engine, they'll be referring to the engine on what is their right side of the airplane. Someone who doesn't know airplanes might say the left engine because that's on my left-hand side as the airplane's flying towards me. So the fact that folks are saying the left engine or the right engine still leaves it a little uncertain which engine we're talking about.
Right.
The fact that there was such a disparity in the amount of time on the engines, almost 700 hours on one, almost 10,000 hours on the other,
right,
isn't unusual in any way. Engines on commercial airliners are swapped out regularly so they can undergo inspection, so it's not unusual to have that disparity.
This is fairly typical. All right, Jim Mckenna, who is an aviation analyst, a journalist who's been writing about aviation for many, many years, thank you very much.
Thank
We've
you.
been having the benefit of your insights pretty much all morning and all afternoon. Thank you very much. We're going to take a break. Our live coverage of today's events in the aftermath of this plane crash in New York City, and we'll be right back.